Welcome to the Jesus Missions Podcast.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Jesus Missions Podcast. Today, I am joined by Doug Cobb, founder of the Finishing Fund and author of an incredible book, The Sprint to the Finish. We're going to hear all about that today. Doug is one of the voices leading the charge to reach the final unreached people groups in our generation. He brings the mind of an entrepreneur and the heart of the Great Commission believer who actually expects God to complete what he has begun. Today, we're talking strategy, calling, courage. We're going to hear all about his book and what it means to run this last stretch of the global race. Doug, thank you for joining me.
Rich, it's so good to be with you, brother.
Yeah, I am. I'm thrilled for this conversation. I know we just connected for a couple of minutes and level set, because for the viewers and people listening here, they know this is I've been singing this song to people that are tuning into this podcast. This is of the utmost importance, is the Great Commission. And before we dive into some of the material and really what your book covers, I'd love for our audience just to hear kind of a little bit of your personal journey to get here. And I've read a little bit about it myself, just so I had some understanding, but I want the audience to hear that. Like, when did this world, the revelation of the Great Commission, or how did this all start for you?
Yeah, I find myself wonderfully and surprisingly doing something here at this stage of my life that I never imagined I would do. I tell people I have the best job in the world, and it's true. I really believe that. But I spent my career in the world of startups and growth companies. We started a company back in the '80s and sold it, and then had a little investing firm starting investing in some other startup companies. That was successful enough. And so my career was, in kind of that world. But importantly, along the way, I got connected to a guy named Paul Eshelman. Paul was at the time the executive director of the Jesus Film Project in Campus Crusade for Christ. And
Wow.
Paul, the first time I met him, within 10 minutes, invited me to go with him to Nigeria. This was in 1994. I was at that time, like every other American, God, I'll do anything you want, just don't make me go to Africa, right? And
We said the same thing.
Well, it's a common feeling, right?
Yeah.
But I went, and that trip really was the hinge, I think, on which my whole life, pivoted. Not only that I'm, get to see the world, another part of the world, which is an important thing for Americans to do. I met Nigerian believers that I've been connected with and supporting since then, but I also got connected to Paul. And later, Paul became the director of a ministry called Finishing the Task, FTT. The task is the Great Commission. And Paul was a believer that it's within our grasp to finish the task, finish the Great Commission in this generation. I agree with that.
Yeah.
And Paul got me involved with FTT, and I began to catch the vision, especially the vision for what are called the unengaged people groups of the world. These are people groups that nobody has ever been to tell them about Jesus. And 20 years ago, there were still many thousands of these groups in the world. And Paul's determination was, we got to figure out how to get somebody to every one of these groups and tell them about Jesus. So I caught that vision. That's really what led to the formation of the Finishing Fund. The Finishing Fund is like a venture capital fund for the Great Commission. We raise money from donors and then invest it in projects that will send the first missionaries to an unengaged people group. And so I've had this for the last 8 years, this ringside seat to these amazing things that are happening in the corners, the edges, and places, we've never heard of, be hard for us to go to. But God's kingdom is breaking into those places in a powerful way.
Wow. So Nigeria was 1998. There's a film that's about to come out called Go Africa. Have you heard of Go Africa?
I have not.
It comes out, I think it's produced by, forget his name, Lauren Cunningham, who founded YWAM. It's his son who produced it.
Okay.
But it's about Nigeria, really. And some of the obviously the tension in Nigeria has been
Very
extreme.
tough.
And so it's kind of about that and kind of pioneering through that. And I think that comes out within a week or so, that film.
Oh,
I don't
really?
know where it's going to air. Yeah, it's a very, yeah. And again, it's another missional film that's coming out to hopefully inspire more people to go.
Oh, really good.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, wow. And so I would dive into the book too, but this finishing fund, tell me about like what was that like for you to start that up? I mean, now, if if I even try to communicate with people about the Great Commission or unreached people groups, it's such a foreign concept to them. So to then ask people to, be giving or supporting or using private equity to do these things, I think it's an amazing model that you've pioneered there. But tell me a little bit more about that and how that's effective and.
I mean, the first thing I would just say is that God has been unbelievably generous, lavishly blessing this effort. When
Mm,
we started it, Gina and I, my wife and I, had the experience of supporting missionaries who had gone to some unengaged people groups in Nepal, in
mm,
India, in Nigeria. And we'd heard these amazing stories about, the first believers in the history of the world in these people groups, just, stuff that could be
amazing.
right out of the book of Acts. And,
Yeah.
God put on my mind, this is just, too good to, people need to know about this. And gave me the idea for this fund. My wife and I made the first contribution to it. We were the first partners in the fund, and I just started telling friends and people that I would meet about it. We had some help with some folks that were networkers helping us meet people, and one by one, God added folks to the mix, and
Wow.
it's now we have close to 300 partners, who have committed, a little more than
Wow.
$35 million to, this cause. And
Amazing.
we're putting it to work as fast as we can, in these projects
Yeah.
to engage the unengaged.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible. Uh, what is the, or maybe you have like do you have any specific stories of like breakthrough you've seen through just like this fund and just things that's been used towards that have really been like, wow, that was really effective. I mean, I'm sure there's hundreds, but just, yeah, I would love to hear some.
There are so many I could tell you. Let me tell you the story about one people group in the country of Ethiopia.
Hmm.
This is the Muslim people group. They live in southeastern Ethiopia, kind of down in the corner where Kenya and Somalia and Ethiopia come together. I can't name them for safety purposes for the
Yeah.
people who are. Um, I've actually been to this place a couple of years ago. I made a trip and visited. Like a lot of Muslim people groups, there was just a lot of resistance to the gospel. We had a great ministry partner that was working hard. They'd been present in the place for about a year, trying to, till the soil, and just nothing had happened. So the leader of the ministry called me and said, we're going to kind of try a Hail Mary here. We've never done this, but we're going to send a medical team in to do a week-long medical clinic in this place. These would have been Ethiopian doctors and nurses who, would do this in different parts of the country. And so they did that. Part of the routine was that before you would see the doctor or the nurse, you would be prayed for by other members of the missionary team. And um, a young girl who had been born blind received her sight as a result of the prayers of these missionaries. The
Wow.
doctors, I've heard their testimonies. The doctors said it wasn't us. We didn't have anything to do with it.
Wow.
And in this place where after a year's effort, there were zero believers in Jesus, zero Jesus followers. Within a week's time, 100 of these people had given their lives.
Wow.
Now there are hundreds of believers in this place. There are many baptized believers. There are regular meetings of the church in different homes in this place, and the
That's
gospel has
incredible.
broken in. And that would be one story out of hundreds of similar things that we have seen
Mm.
with. We read the history about these pioneering missionaries, Adoniram Judson and Hudson Taylor, who
Yeah.
in the
I'm reading
19th,
a book right now about Hudson
yeah,
Taylor.
they'd get on a boat and they'd go 5-6 months to a place and they'd live there
Yeah.
all their lives. And at the end of that, maybe, have a small, church to show for that, a few converts, sometimes a few more. But, that was really pioneering work. They were chipping rock the Spirit is working in such a powerful way these days that, it's very common for us to see these big breakthroughs of the gospel in new
Mm,
places.
mm,
That place of the year, very often it's within, the first day or even the first couple of weeks, we'll see,
wow.
the first believers coming to faith. And that's just because the Holy Spirit is working ahead of his people to
Hmm.
prepare them to hear the good news when it comes.
Wow. Wow. With this, with supporting and the allocation of all these funds, how do you think strategically about, like, there's these places we want to like sow into, or is it partner ministries that you work with? You're like, hey, we just trust that they're the boots on the ground. We just give to them. How does that look for you?
Yeah, our kind of guiding document is a list of people groups that has been published by Finishing the Task, FTT,
Hmm.
for the last 20 years. Paul, that was one of Paul's invitations. In fact, if you met Paul, you wouldn't be with him for more than about 10 minutes before he'd pull the list out and push it under your nose and say, all right, which one of these can you help with? Right. Names, they don't mean anything to us in the West, but,
Right.
um, and so, that's been our kind of guiding document. Our goal has been, okay, here's a group on the list. Let's find a ministry who's working nearby, who will take them and, execute a project to engage them with the
Mm,
gospel. So over the
mm,
course of 8 years, we've worked with 40 or 50, 40 or 45 different ministries in 65 different countries. Kind of wherever there was a group on the list, we
yeah.
would try to find a partner who would make that
Wow.
happen. Not everything has worked,
Yeah.
as you might
Yeah.
expect. This is
Yeah.
very, very frontier work. These are very hard places, but many projects have worked very well, and
Yeah.
we've seen enormous fruit
Mm.
from it by God's
What
grace.
what do you maybe it's a vast variety. I'm so curious in this, just from a strategic standpoint. Like, do you find that is it when you're talking about allocation of funds or like funding projects, is it funding the missionaries to just like be able to go, or is it like, hey, we need to help with resources in that area, like clean water or medical or buildings, or is it kind of all of the above?
It is, different ministries have different models. And so, how one ministry would use the funds would be a little different from another.
Right.
But,
Makes sense.
funds are often used for some level of support for the missionaries,
Yeah.
for their training, for their transportation.
Yeah.
Sometimes there is an allocation for some kind of humanitarian project, a water
Mm,
well or, some other kind of thing that can be done as a service. Often those are useful as entry strategies in,
yeah.
really hard places.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are materials that are involved. Often these ministries are using the Jesus film as a part of their
Mm,
break-in strategy. We usually don't have to pay for that. The Jesus Film
right.
Project provides those free to, the ministries. Other ministries, Faith Comes by Hearing and their oral tools.
Mm,
They'll give
mm,
those to ministries. So it's a collaboration. We're supporting the direct work, but other ministries are kicking
yeah.
in too. So
Yeah.
varies a little bit from ministry to ministry, but that's a
Yeah.
kind of a common use of funds.
Yeah. What do you see and is like the bottlenecks in reaching the unreached people groups? Is it like there's a point where it's like, oh, it's the funding or it's not enough people? Like, what are you seeing as those bottlenecks?
Um, I would say that, the biggest bottleneck is just finding the people who are willing to go to these people groups.
Mm,
The ones that are left they're left for a reason. They're the
mm,
most, sometimes they're hostile. Very, almost always they're in a remote, hard to get to place. Before we recorded, you told me you'd been to some remote places in Nepal where you'd had to trek for several days to even get
yeah.
to these, right? These are not places you stop off on your way home from work to, go. You
Yeah.
have to make an
Yeah.
intentional effort to go there. And while there are lots of great ministries working in many parts of the world, in India, we probably have, 10 or 15 really great ministry partners who are doing unbelievable things in India. Just an amazing
Yeah.
bench of ministries. There are other parts of the world where there is almost nobody working. It's
Mm,
just difficult. So,
mm,
the Amazon is just a vast territory. It's hard for Americans to even comprehend how big and empty it is. And, there just aren't a ton of great ministries
Yeah.
working there. Another really hard place is southern Russia, an area called the North Caucasus. The Dagestan would be the political
Oh,
name.
yeah.
Place. There's these little people groups there, Sunni Muslim people groups, very, very isolated, very, very hard to reach, and just
Wow.
really hard to find people who are willing to go. So,
Yeah.
I would say that's the biggest challenge. Another big challenge is war and civil strife,
Mm.
like the Sudan.
Yeah.
Uh, there's a lot of work needs to be done. It's just very difficult because there's this civil war that's just kind of raging all over the country, and you know, when warfare breaks out, people tend to, hide. They go to ground. And, even courageous and faithful missionaries will, because, if you're going to get shot, you're going to try to, be careful. And so that's one of the ways the enemy helps to, slow the work down, is by
Yeah.
just creating violence in a place, making it
Yeah.
move about.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I was just thinking as you were mentioning, one of the tools that's sometimes used to break ground is this Jesus film, right? I was
Mhm.
almost just, and we're making our own film at the moment called The Great Commission, and it's almost like we're using this as a breaking ground tool for Western believers, right? To break ground, and it's almost like a parallel opposite. It's like the not for the unreached people groups, but for the people who are not engaged in the global need for a mission, and unreached people. So it's kind of like I don't know, it just kind of mirrors it in an interesting way.
Yeah.
Um,
I wrote this book, The Sprint to the Finish, specifically because so few Westerners are aware of these amazing things that we've just been talking
yeah,
about. The
yeah,
effort to every people group with the gospel, the effort to translate the Bible into every language in the world, the
mm,
effort to take the gospel to the ends of the earth, to plant churches in every village, everywhere in the world. These things are happening in amazing ways, and maybe one American in seven really has any idea at all. American Christian in seven
yeah,
has any idea that these things are taking place. There's just such a
right,
lack of awareness. It's a tragedy to me, because
yeah,
I believe that our generation has the opportunity to finish this,
yeah,
and people are missing the most exciting part of the race, right? What's the most fun
yeah.
thing watching a race? It's the finish
To
line. And
finish,
here we are charging up on it, and most people don't even know there's a race being run. It's
yeah.
tragedy.
Yeah. What do you think? One thing I've experienced, and I want to dive a little more into your book now and into what you're really trying to communicate and some of the core themes and ways you want to help people understand. I think one of the things, two of the experiences I've had, and maybe you could share how your book touches on these or your perspective on these.
Yep.
One is when I tell people, their first thing is often disbelief because they think like these numbers are too big. And like there's no way that's right. And you're like, no, this is, this is the truth. And then if they do, it's almost too big of a number to comprehend where they think like I can't even have an impact on this.
Yes.
Um, and then I've talked to pastors or leaders of churches who um it almost like ruffles if they didn't know, it almost ruffles their feathers where it makes them uncomfortable and they like it's gonna cost them something or it's I don't know if it messes with their theology or they would say like, well, there's people here that are unreached that we need to reach, like in our local city. And so there's kind of some pushback there as well. So just any kind of how does your book address those or what do you kind of what's your experience being with these?
Yeah. Let's talk about the reached, unreached, unengaged thing for a second. So,
Yeah.
we do in the book is we talk about the idea that the world is divided into these people groups. A people group is a group of people that share a common language, geography, ethnicity, history, culture. There's different lists. I like to say that, there's somewhere between 12 and 13,000 of these people groups. The Bible calls them ethnos, nations, scattered around the world. And Jesus said, Matthew 28:19, go and make disciples of all nations. He specifically told us to reach every one of them with the gospel. You can think about those 12,000 being divided kind of into three broad categories, three groups. At the top of the stack would be the reached world, which is where we live. Not everybody in the reached world is a believer. In fact, there's many that are not, but everyone in the reached world has relatively easy access to the gospel. You know, if you're living in America and you want to know more about Jesus, it is not hard to find people who tell you about that. There's churches you can go visit. There's television, radio. I mean, tons of ways to find out. The reached world, access to the gospel is readily available. The next band below that would be the unreached world. And the unreached world are people groups where there are some believers, but not very many. An example I like to use would be the Turks in Turkey. There are 60 million Turks in Turkey. I've seen different numbers, but let's be generous and say there might be 60,000 Jesus followers among the Turks in Turkey. So 60,000 divided by 60 million is 0.1%. 1 in 1,000 Turks is a Jesus follower. What that means is that the typical Turk will live his or her entire life and never meet another Turkish follower of Jesus, right?
Wow.
There won't be any churches with them. They might hear about something, but they're going to think about Christianity as being something remote and distant. And if they have a dream or a vision, if they want to know more about the faith, there's really very little way for them to be able to access that. So this is the unreached world, less than 2% Christian, down to very, very tiny percentages in some places. So reached at the top, easy access; unreached, hard access. At the bottom of the stack, unengaged. No Christians, no churches, no access to the gospel at all. And this is really the tragedy, that after 2,000 years, there could still be, Jesus told the disciples, go and make disciples of all nations. We've been running this race for 2,000 years, and there are still groups left that nobody's ever been to tell them about Jesus. It just breaks my heart. And so we've taken on is to try to drive that, we are on a mission to zero people groups that are unengaged. And so, the goal is to turn all the unengaged groups into unreached groups, and to turn ultimately all the unreached groups into reached groups. And, there are different strategies underway around the world to, try to accomplish those goals.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. It was a great breakdown of just understanding. And in unengaged, is there an estimate of like the global population that's unengaged? I mean, I've heard 3.4 billion unreached. How many are unengaged?
Yeah, it'd be a very small number, of the remaining unengaged groups. When we started this effort about 20 years ago, it would have been 3,500 groups and hundreds of millions of people in those groups. Today we believe that the number of unengaged groups is under 100, and the population of those would be just a few millions, probably.
Wow.
Most of the that are left are, very, very small, from 1,000 to maybe 25,000 people.
Okay.
So the unengaged population has really dramatically fallen. This is one of the things I talk about in the book is, I think this will be, by God's grace, the first finish line of the Great Commission that the church crosses. I think we're maybe a couple of years away from seeing, that unengaged category eliminated. Now that don't mean we're done. There's still lots of work to do, right? There's a whole lot of unreached people who don't have access to the gospel, and we're going to keep working on that. But won't it be exciting when we've crossed, one finish line of this race?
Absolutely. What about kind of your experience with like the local church, the Western local church, and their involvement, their engagement there? I know it's so diverse in itself, right? We've got 300,000 churches here, so they're all got a different appetite for missions. But what are some of your experiences with kind of engage? Because what I see is, I'm like, man, there's 300,000 churches here in America. I mean,
Mhm.
and I'm in Orange County, California. It's like a Bible Belt of
That's
California.
right.
There's
Yeah.
churches everywhere,
Right.
and some of the yeah, and when I look at those metrics, I'm like, okay, well, if you it's simple math, and it would never happen this way exactly, but like you feel like, okay, well, there's 300,000 churches. If every church sent one couple into the missions field, right?
Mhm.
Like if
Yep.
every church could support one couple,
Yep.
and teach their church what the Great Commission's relevance is to today, then you've got that would be 600,000 more missionaries in the field. And right now, the estimated number of full time missionaries is 400,000, and only 3% of them, 12,000, are working in unreached people groups. So you suddenly
Yes.
go from, and let's say we capture 10% of, so instead of 300,000 churches, we capture 30,000 churches,
Right.
and 30,000 churches in a couple. That's
Right.
60,000 missionaries you send to unreached people groups. Instead of the 12,000 already working there, you have 5 times the effort in the field. I'm like, man, we have this sleeping giant of an army that I feel like God is wanting to wake up to say, like, man, we are rich in resource. We are, and we have so much more potential. And it feels like that's almost like a final frontier for us, is re-engaging, the local church. But anyway, there's some numbers I run in my head. I'm like, there's math here that can work if we to say what you're doing yeah.
I think that the, reaction you've had from some of the pastoral friends you've talked to about this is not uncommon. Pastors, like their parishioners, don't really know these things are happening, and their understanding of the task is somewhat limited, right? So, a couple things. One thing is, you mentioned this, most missionaries that are being sent, from the West, are working well behind the front lines. We hear about folks who are going to Guatemala or to Haiti or to Jamaica or to, Kenya or Uganda. And, God bless anybody who's willing to go and do, serve the Lord in those places. I'm not critical of anybody doing that. But we tend to think that those people are somehow at the front line of the Great Commission,
Right.
but really they're not. They're in places where the church has been for, in some cases, hundreds of years,
Mm,
and they're doing important work, but they're not necessarily engaged in that frontier function of the Great Commission. Another
mm,
thing that most Americans miss, and it actually relates to what you were just saying. There's a powerful mission force that we don't think about very often in America, and that is the national church in these countries is stepping up in a huge way,
mm,
as a force to accomplish this work. In fact, in the work we do in the Finishing Fund of sending missionaries to unengaged people groups, out of 800 groups that we've helped fund, I think we've sent Americans just 2 times.
wow.
Um, it's almost always Indian believers going to the unengaged in India, or Laotians going, or Chinese
Mm,
going to the Chinese, right? It's
mm,
the national church taking on this responsibility for the last lap of the Great Commission race. In fact, they feel an imperative about it.
right.
When they understand the opportunity to reach these groups in their own places, they become almost adamant that they don't want us to come do it. They want to be the ones to do it. So
Mm,
it's actually kind of a partnership between the West and our brothers and sisters around the world. They're doing that last mile work. They're the ones that are going actually into the places for the first time with the gospel. What the
mm,
West is contributing is support, financial support,
mm.
training, project management skills, reporting, things. There's things we're good at in the West. We know how to do a budget. We know how to do a project,
Yeah,
and right, how to do
yeah.
reporting. Uh, there's things we're not good at in the West. 120 degrees, that kind of knocks us, down. We can't,
Mm,
or the diseases, some of the food. And so, when we come together with our brothers and sisters in these, in around the world, it really is a beautiful picture of the body of Christ. Not
mm,
everybody's eye, not everybody's an ear, but when we come together and we do what we can do, the result is a powerful, impact. And so,
yeah.
yeah, I talk in the book about sort of 3 things that everybody can think about. And I think this would apply to every church too. So, one would be everybody can pray. for this. It's a spiritual battle. It must be girded with prayer. It must be built on a foundation of prayer. And so every person can pray. You don't need a passport. You don't need to be rich. You just have to be willing to, set aside a few minutes every day to pray. And really, it's just the Lord's Prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's a great commission prayer. So number one, everybody can pray. Number two, a lot of us can give. Americans are rich. Even the average American is wealthy by world standards. And as you were saying, it wouldn't take very much extra giving to make a huge impact at the frontier because so little money is getting there. And so first we can pray, second we can give, and then third, some of us will be people who will go, and God bless anybody that God calls into that work. But even before you get there, there's still two very important things we can all be doing. Every church, every person praying for the Great Commission and giving to see it accomplished.
Yeah. I think that's an amazing breakdown, and a really, it's great to hear that perspective, because I think that, I think it is like the most effective people to reach the culture or the nation are going to be the local believer, right? Because they're not like the foreigner. There's not these cultural lines you have to cross, or even the limitations of language and things like this. You're already embedded, have the understanding, and so I think that's that's such a great point.
Another thing that people, misunderstand about this task is, they assume that to reach a people group, you have to learn that people group's language. And that would be awesome, to do that, but that takes a long time. And, it's difficult to do. But in fact, that's kind of based on an American understanding of language. There's a joke that gets a laugh all around the world. What do you call somebody that speaks one language? American, right? It's kind of, because when you travel the world, what you find is that people typically are able to speak more than one language. And this is especially true for these tiny minority people groups. When they're in their village with their family, with their relatives, their friends, they're going to speak their village language. But they go to the marketplace, they go to the doctor, they have to interact with the government. And when they're doing that, they're not going to be doing that in that, village language. They're going to be doing it in some sort of a shared language. Sometimes they're called trade languages that are shared among different people groups so that they can do business together and, interact. And so one of the advantages that national missionaries have is that they often have that shared language. And so when they walk into the village, they may not be able to speak the language of the village, but they can speak a language that both they and the people trying to reach understand, right? And what we have found is that shared language approach is sufficient to begin the work of the gospel in place. Now, that doesn't mean you don't want to bring the Bible into their language, translate it into that. Absolutely you do. You want to move on that as fast as you can, because everybody wants God's word in their heart language, in the language that they most best understand. But you can begin with shared language. What's cool about that is that's how the gospel spread in the New Testament. When Paul would go to different places, those people all had their national, local languages as well. But Greek was a language that they all shared. And so Paul was able to go and gospel using the shared language of Greek as a way to break in and, begin the work of the gospel in those places. So it's always good when you find, biblical models for the things that you're doing, and shared language is one of those.
Yeah. Wow. When you're looking at the missions field right now, and obviously you've written this book, as you're saying, sprint to the finish, like, hey, we can see a finish line. Like, it's maybe at a point in time it was not visible. Now we can see what makes you feel that way? What makes you have that conviction?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I think of the finish line. I think of three finish lines for this Great Commission. We talk about this in the book. So the three would be, call it 3 Bs, okay? Believers in every people group, the Bible in every language, and a body of Christ, a church in every place. So every nation, every language, every place. Those would be, I think you can, we can talk about it if you want, but there's biblical foundation for all three of those those finish lines. Well, I've been working for the last, well, really 15 years, the Finishing Fund, the last 8 years on that first goal, every people group. And, I told you, I think we're under 100 groups that, have not been started, and that we may be only a couple of years away. That's probably the one that I am most best personally acquainted with. But I
Yeah.
also know the guys that are working on Bible translation. In the book, we talk about the goals that have been set, that by the end of 2033, the Bible would be available in the heart languages of like 99.96% of the people on the
Wow.
planet. Really, that we would be, the Bible in every language goal would be accomplished. That's only, 8 years out
So, yeah,
from where
it's
we are
coming
now,
quick.
right? And I see the progress toward it in the reports that I'm seeing, that, the new starts and the completions are rapidly accelerating. And then I'm also privileged to be a part of a group called the Achieve Alliance. Achieve is a church in every village everywhere. It's a great acronym.
Wow.
And,
Yeah.
we are working to figure out how to do these Achieve projects that go to an unreached place and plant churches in every village, every place that people live within that territory. It's an enormous task. There are probably, there are millions, maybe 3 or 4 million places that need churches that don't have them. Um, but this is this is a great application of the old, how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. And
Yeah.
so what you do is you break the problem down into bite-sized chunks. You don't start at the whole country of India, or even at a state, or even at a district. You go to the next level down, the block, and you survey 2 or 3 blocks, and you figure out there's 500 villages in those 2 or 3 blocks, and 300 of them don't have a church. We'll go get those done. 3 blocks, not the whole country of India, but if you do that over and over again, before very long,
Yeah.
you've got it done. So the Achieve Alliance has also set 2033 as our, by God's grace, deadline to see that vision achieved. So I just am privileged to know about the efforts that people are making, and the deadlines that have been set, to believe
Yeah.
that, this is a possible thing, that we could be the ones to see it finish.
When people say 2033, is that a convenient timeline to the 2000 years? Is it like they just could it have been 34, but they're like, let's just squeeze and make it 33? So,
I think they're very motivated. The best we understand, the crucifixion, resurrection, ascension of Christ, we're done in 33 AD. The Great Commission was given in 33 AD. And so I think there's a strong motivation to say
mm.
2,000 years is enough. Let's finish it and be done. We don't need to start a third millennium of this mission.
Yeah. Wow. Uh, if you were to, when you're, this book is called The Sprint to the Finish. What do you
Mhm.
see as the greatest momentum and the greatest resistance to the completion of the Great Commission?
Well, I would say that's a great question. I would say, the momentum is building, especially in the world of Bible translation. Those guys have really come together in a remarkable way. The CEOs of the top 11 Bible translation ministries in the world meet monthly to coordinate and plan together. And so, where they once were collegial, they were friendly, but they weren't coordinating. Now there's enormous coordination. So, 2 ministries don't say we'll both do this language. If ministry A says we'll do it, ministry B says that's great, we've got 100 more on the list, we'll do this other one, right? And so you've eliminated duplication. You've got enormous innovation taking place in the methodology of translation. So, I would say that's one place where I see, just great opportunity, to see that goal completed. I
Mm,
think the every place goal is probably the biggest challenge. Right now we don't even know how many places there are. Are there
mm,
3 million? Are there 4 million? Are there 5 million? I mean, that it kind of makes a difference, knowing, those numbers. So there's actually right now an effort underway to map the entire world down to the village level, something that has never been done before by any government that I'm aware of, or and certainly not on a global basis. Literally to map, to figure out, where is every village, and does it have a church? Does it have believers, or is it completely, empty of Christian presence? So that
Huh.
effort is underway. There's a number of countries that have been picked to be the first subjects for that. Those surveys are happening, and right behind the surveys will be projects to go in turn all those red places, turn them green with
Mm,
church. So
mm,
yeah,
okay.
it's a big task,
Yeah,
but we're taking it on.
I love it. I'm so inspired by what you're doing. Uh, another question I'm curious about is if people watching, whether it's a church leader or even just an individual, a believer,
Yep.
and they were like, "Man, I had no idea. I want to double my I want to refocus. I want to get involved." Where would you tell them to start? I mean, maybe it's two different questions. There's the individual and there's the church. Like if a church was to say, "I want to get involved," where do they begin?
Yeah, I mean, one thing we did in the book is, we name a number. I should count it, but I don't know, 50, 60 different ministries that are involved in this work, whether it's, gospel engagement or Bible translation or church planting. And at the back of the book, we list them all and have the URLs for their website.
Mm,
So,
mm,
one great way would just be to go to that list and, pick a ministry that's operating in an area of interest, whether that might be church planting or translation or media, whatever it would be, refugee ministry, and, just reach out, tell them, hey, I'm Pastor Joe from, XYZ church, and I want my church to have a role in the sprint to the finish. And I promise
mm.
they'll be happy to talk to you and help you figure out the right way to get involved.
Yeah. And, yeah, so that would be a good resource for both the individual and the church because they can
Right.
look
Yeah.
and filter through and find, yeah.
We also, we have a chapter in the book on prayer, and we name in there a number of the Great Commission prayer initiatives that are underway. So there are great prayer collaboratives that are happening that help you with, help direct prayer, focus on specific days, praying for different places in the world, people group of the day, unengaged group of the day, unreached group of the day that you can pray for. So there's some great resources for getting, your people involved, either you as an individual or your small group or your church involved in praying as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, such a, I don't know, poignant part of this
Mhm.
that I think people sometimes you do also get the young and hungry youth who do wanna just go, and there's this foundation
Yeah.
of prayer that can't be missed.
Yeah. Most
Um,
of those ministries would also be happy to talk to you about how you can personally consider going.
mm,
There's a lot of work that goes into that. You've got to raise support. You've got to get trained. You've got to figure out where you want to go. I mean, there's a whole lot of things,
yeah,
but a lot of these ministries would be very happy to help you
yeah.
figure that out for yourself.
Yeah. Actually, I have a unique question I just thought of. As we as I started getting involved in missions, we looked for missionaries who we were wanting to help support that are working on unreached people groups, and we've been doing that. And I've also been trying to educate myself on just the landscape, reading books from like Ralph Winter, who suggested
Mhm.
people groups, or
Yep.
who's the William Carey, and Hudson Taylor. And so I'm slowly just like and digesting all of this.
These
And
heroes.
there's these heroes, yeah, and these different perspectives on how missionaries should be funded. There's so much different kind of like thought. Some think like you raise full-time support, so you work full-time there. Others, like in William Carey's book, he made it a point to set up, you know, a printing press and a school and his own businesses that sustained his lifestyle to reach India. And what is your perspective there on that kind of? I mean, I know you have the Finishing Fund, which is helping support people, so I'm just kind of
Right.
curious with that.
I would say all of the above, right? We don't we don't want the best to be the enemy of the good. If the I think business as mission, business as an entry strategy and a support strategy. Well, that's a great model,
Mm,
but there's
mm,
be possible.
mm,
There's places where support is probably required. They're too
mm,
remote, just not a way to make a living,
mm.
and and so um, rather than argue about which one is the best, I'm like, let's just go, right?
I like,
Whatever.
yeah, absolutely.
There is a theory in the world of movements, church planting and disciple making movements, that attempts to mobilize ordinary believers as the agents of movement, right? So the idea is that each person, as soon as they meet Jesus, as soon as they've, become a follower of Jesus, they immediately are encouraged to go tell their friends, let me tell you about this amazing thing that I've heard. They don't know much, but they know enough to say, Jesus loves us and he's given his life for us and he will go to heaven if we believe in him, and so the idea is that you don't try to create these armies of paid people spreading the gospel. You try to create armies of lay people spreading the gospel. And when it works, you have, churches that plant churches that plant churches that plant churches. You get these movements of church planting, multi-generational, that can spread very rapidly and become very large. In India, there are some movements of churches, networks that have report to have more than 1 million churches in them. It's an astounding
Wow.
number. And mostly those are not based on, there's a few people at the top that maybe are being paid to coordinate and organize, but most of the work is being done by volunteers. And
Wow.
I do think that there is, that's sensible, given the task at hand. Trying to pay everybody is probably going to be pretty difficult. Better to
Right.
mobilize our brothers and sisters
Mm.
with the heart to do it and, set them free to go make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Man, this is incredible. I just, is there anything else just for the viewers listening that you want them to hear, or if you were to speak directly to people who are young believers who
Yeah.
are hearing this for the first time, what would you want them to take away, one from this conversation, but also from your book?
I think there would be probably two things, and I think this would apply to young, old, whoever it might be. But one thing is that this sprint to the finish is a generational opportunity. There will be a generation that will finish this task, and it will be a pretty generation. If you think about all of the people you mentioned, people like William Carey and Adoniram Judson, Hudson Taylor, that gave their whole lives to this task, really with no hope of seeing it finished. And that's just generation upon generation, all the way back to the apostles. To be a part of the generation that finishes will be an unbelievable generational opportunity, and you don't want to miss it. You want to find your place in the sprint, whether that's as a prayer or a giver or a goer or some combination of all of those things. You want to have, a place in the race. And, for young people, that they may have more opportunity to go, but they also might, say, look, this is going to be something we're going to specifically decide we're going to give to support. And, as God increases our capability, our capacity, we're going to try to make that happen. So one thing would be, don't miss it. Find your place in the race, right? The second thing I think would be something that I find very exciting and encouraging, and that is to understand that the Bible seems to say, I believe it says, that Jesus tied his return to the completion of this task. In Matthew chapter 24, at the beginning of that chapter, the disciples asked Jesus a pretty direct question: when are you coming back? That's my paraphrase, but if you look at it, verse 3, that's what they asked. When are you coming? And he, in verse 14 of that chapter, Matthew 24:14, he answers them this way: this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when Jesus was asked, when are you coming back? His answer was, when you have finished the work that I've given you to do of taking the gospel to the whole world. Once the gospel has been preached to the whole world, to every nation, then the door will be open to my return. And, I personally think that is the most explicit answer about the return of Jesus in the Bible. It's a direct answer to a direct question. And I believe it explains what Peter talks about in 2 Peter chapter 3, when he says that we should try to hasten the coming of that day. You think, well, what in the world can we do to hasten the coming of the return of Christ? Well, I can only think of one thing. If Jesus is going to come back when we finish, then if we can finish one day sooner, then that's one sooner he
Yes.
will come back. Now, God probably has all of that planned, right? But
Yeah.
nevertheless, the Bible challenges us to, to hasten the coming of that day, to be involved in seeing this task completed. And so, you know, everybody should find their place in the race, and everybody should be excited that, Jesus promised he'd come back when we get finished.
Wow. Yeah, those are incredible takeaways. And where can we find your book? How can we follow, support what you're doing?
Thank you very much. The title is The Sprint to the Finish. It's available at Amazon. You can also ask for it in your bookstore. They can order it for you. It may or may not be in there. So, most people buy their books from Amazon these days.
Yeah,
So
I looked. It was there on
that
Amazon. I was like, perfect.
that's the place to find it. And we're working on study guides for it as well. So if you like it and want to use it for a study for your small group or for your church, we'll have those tools available. If you want to find more about the Finishing Fund, you could look at finishingfund.org, finishingfund.org, and learn more about that. The book website is sprintbook.net. Sprintbook.net is the place you can go and learn more about the book.
Amazing. Well, Doug, it has been such a pleasure just hearing your heart, your wisdom on all of this. And look, thank you everybody for listening. The Great Commission is not just a distant idea. This is a living invitation. We hope Doug's story is stirred something in you. Take the next step. Pray, send, go, tell the story. If this episode encouraged you, share it with somebody who needs to push toward reaching unreached peoples. And this is the Jesus Missions Podcast. Until next time, keep your eyes on the nations and your faith in the one who sends. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Jesus Missions Podcast. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share.